Today I want to share with you how to make a very easy fermented probiotic-rich drink called Rejuvelac. This is made with grain. You can use grain that has gluten, you can use grain that's gluten-free. Either type of grain will work. But what's best about this drink is it's going to rejuvenate your digestive system. Whether you overate during the holidays, whether maybe you got sick during the holidays and had to take different medications that may have affected your gut health, whatever the case may be, Rejuvelac is wonderful for recolonizing all the good bacteria in your gut. And as scientists tell us, a healthy gut with lots of good probiotics makes for a healthier person. Alrighty, let's get started. Hi, sweet friends. If we're meeting for the first time, I'm Mary from marysnest.com and author of the Modern Pioneer Cookbook and the Modern Pioneer Pantry. And I'd like to welcome you to my kitchen. What makes Rejuvelac so easy to make, plus it only takes a few days, it's a very short fermentation, is the fact that this is an aerobic ferment, meaning that it actually needs air. If you've made other ferments that were anaerobic, that means without air, such as when maybe you made sauerkraut, that requires a little more work because you've got to shred your cabbage, you've got to put it into your jar, cover it with a salted brine, weight it down maybe with one of those pebble weights or some small jar, whatever the case may be, and then maybe you used a pickle pipe or some sort of other fermentation device that's made as a cap that can go on your jar. And the reason that you're doing that is because an anaerobic without air ferment relies on the lactobacillus that's already on the vegetable. That's the good bacteria that's on the vegetable. In the case of sauerkraut, that's on the cabbage. And when that lactobacillus proliferates and grows by eating the natural sugars that are in the cabbage, it creates carbon dioxide. That's a byproduct. And so these different devices, pickle pipes, sometimes they're different kinds of tubes, are made to release that carbon dioxide. If you've been with me a while, you've seen me make many anaerobic ferments, and often I just use a jar just like this, what we're going to talk about today, but without the lid. But I'll have a jar with a lid like this, and I'll just release it, and then every day, and then I'll tighten it again. And that's simply to release the CO2. And usually somewhere between 7 to 14 days, your ferment will start to be ready, and then you'll refrigerate and so on and so forth. But the good news is, with Rejuvelac, this is, as I mentioned, an aerobic ferment. So we're going to rely not only on any good bacteria that may be on the grain that we're using, we're going to rely on a good bacteria called Acetobacter. And that's just in the air. So when we make our Rejuvelac, we're not going to worry about this lid. We're not going to worry about having to burp it. We're not going to have to worry about a pickle pipe or anything like that. We don't even weight it down. All we're going to do, and we're going to walk through all of this, but I'm just giving you a little preview here, is you're going to, I love these. These are little coffee filters, but any fabric will do. If you have a little square of cheesecloth or a flour sack towel, paper towel, whatever you want, you're going to put that on, and you're just going to put a rubber band just to keep it in place. And that's it. So as you see, you don't need a lot of equipment. You just need a jar and something to cover it. And then usually often what I'll use is a clean wooden spoon or a chopstick or something like that. You are going to stir your Rejuvelac, 2 to 3 times a day, whenever you remember. It's not crucial. But in any event, I want to mention that I will have this full recipe with all the instructions on how to do this. We're going to walk through it today over on my website, marysnest.com. And also, if you have my second cookbook, the Modern Pioneer Pantry, this recipe, if you want to follow along today, is on page 194 and 195. You can see it here. See, this is kind of what we were just talking about. You're going to see this, though, in action today. Now, I want to mention, in addition to showing you today how to make Rejuvelac, I'm also including a little compilation here that'll follow after we make Rejuvelac for some other different types of home remedies that I always think are very good to make in January, because these all can be made the same day and used the same day. There's no long-term process, like if you're making an elderberry syrup or a fire cider tonic, things like that, that you often want to make, earlier in the season, so that you have them ready, so that they've had time to steep and so on and so forth, and so that you have them ready come cold and flu season. But what's going to follow after Rejuvelac to help that we're going to make, and that's going to help recolonize our digestive tracts, what's going to follow are a number of videos that I've shared with you in the past, but we've had so many new people come on board here that I wanted to include them here as a compilation so that you can catch up. And maybe, even if you've been with me a while, maybe some of these will be new to you. Maybe you haven't seen them in the past. But I'll have timestamps and everything to make it very easy for you if you want to jump around at any time. But now let's get started and make the Rejuvelac. Now, the first thing that we need to do is, now, are there a couple of different ways you can do this? Yes. But I'm going to share with you kind of the very traditional way of doing it. Now, fermented grain beverages have been around for forever. This is something that has been done for a millennia by our ancestors. And as I mentioned, you can use any kind of grain. You can use modern day wheat berries that are very easy to find, often in the bulk section at most grocery stores. If you've got, and you're going to want whole grain. If you've got einkorn whole grain, emmer, spelt, any of the anything in the wheatberry family, it's all fine. Rye, that was often very popular in Eastern Europe, making fermented grain beverages using rye. Let's see what else. Barley, oat groats, and anything that any type of grain that you use in your traditional foods kitchen, as long as you're starting with the whole grain, and I'll explain why in a minute, will work for this. So gluten-free, either way, you're in essence home free. You can use whatever grain you like to make this. And each grain will bring kind of its own flavor profile to the table, so to speak. But what I'm going to do is, I have a very detailed video where I shared with you how I like to soak and sprout grain, and that's what I want to show you here. And in that video, I'm soaking grain, I'm sprouting grain, then I'm taking it one step further where I'm drying it, and then I'm turning it into sprouted flour. And I will be sure to link to that full video in the description below in case this is something that interests you and you want to learn how to make your own sprouted flour. A lot of people like to use sprouted flour, especially when they're doing quick breads, muffins, cakes, things like that, where you're not using a sourdough to help break down some of the phytic acid in the grain. And I have a lot of videos where I talked about phytic acid, why do we want to break it down, and all of that. I'll be sure to link to those in the description below. But the quick answer is phytic acid can sometimes make it difficult for us to digest food and absorb nutrients and so on and so forth. So breaking down some of it makes digestion easier. Does it also have a good side? Yes. It's on the one hand, it's an anti-nutrient, can maybe sometimes strip vitamins from us, make it a little difficult to digest food. But on the other hand, it's an antioxidant, meaning that it helps combat oxidation in our body, oxidation being a bad thing. So it's got good and bad. So in essence, you neutralize some of it, but not all of it. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. But what I want to do is, my sweet husband helps me edit these videos, And what I've had him do is just take out a few snippets of that long form video so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. And basically, you're going to take your whole grain. And what I used here today are wheat berries, since that's what many people find it easy to get. And all I did was soak these in a jar with water, or in a bowl overnight, drain them, and then what I like to do, as opposed to putting them in a jar the way people do for sprouting, I don't know if it's just me, or if maybe you're a beginner in this and you've encountered this too. I find that can be a little more prone to developing mold. What I like to do is take my wet grain and just spread it out in my colander like I've done here, and then I put it over a bowl. I spray it once or twice a day just to keep it damp, and within a couple of days it'll start to sprout. And it's perfect. There's no odd odor, things are not overly damp, and I just think it works beautifully. So let's go to that video and watch those clips, and you can see exactly what I'm doing. Now, what I've got here are 2 cups of wheat berries, or wheat grains, whatever you may call them. And these are from my grocery store, and they're the only type of grains that they sell in the whole form like this. I'm not able to find spelt or einkorn or grains like that. Those I have to buy online. So I thought that I would just use wheat berries, since these are the easiest to find. But you can certainly do what we're going to do today with any type of grain that you like to use, or that you can find locally, or if you prefer to purchase online. So the first thing we're going to do is take these 2 cups of wheat berries. We're just going to put them in a bowl, and then I'm going to cover them with some spring water. You can certainly use tap water, but if you do, either boil it and let it cool down, or leave it overnight to allow the chlorine to dissipate, because the chlorine can interfere with the soaking and sprouting process. So all we're going to do now is simply pour this water on top, basically just enough to cover, and we're going to allow for the fact that the wheat berries are going to absorb a lot of these. And the reason that we start with the soaking process is that this helps just soften them a bit and prepare them for sprouting. Alrighty, so we're just going to make sure that everything gets nicely saturated with the water, and then you're just going to leave this in a nice warm spot in your kitchen, undisturbed, until the next day. I've got the wheat berries all nice and soaked here. They're going to sit overnight in a warm kitchen on my counter, or you can put it on top of your refrigerator, or in a pantry or a cabinet, anywhere where it can just sit a little cozy and undisturbed. Then tomorrow, what we'll do, I'll just give you a little preview. We're going to drain the wheat berries, and they will have plumped up nicely by tomorrow. And then we're going to take them, and we're just going to spread them in this colander, just like this. And tomorrow they'll be plumped, so it will be much easier to do this. And then when we get them all in here and plumped, we're just going to rest them over a bowl, and twice a day, we're just going to wet them and then put them back over the bowl until they sprout. Sprouting can take up to about 5 days, depending on what time of year it is, how warm it is in your kitchen, and so on and so forth. And I'm just going to put these back in right now, and then that's it. And once, you can just put a little, when you put it back in the bowl to drain, I usually put a little cover over it and give them, up to 5 days. They'll sprout. And then at that point, they'll have little tails on them. Now, I just wanted to mention a word as to why I use this colander. You may see instructions where people put the soaked wheat berries in a jar with a little lid that has like a screen on it, and then they wet it, and then they empty it, and then they leave it and allow it to sprout, and so on and so forth. You can certainly do that if you're comfortable working that way. The reason that I like to use the colander is I find it aerates the wheat berries beautifully, and I've never gotten any mold. And sometimes people that I know who have used the jar method have found that they either can develop a little mold or they'll forget to really give a good shake off of the water and the wheat berries stay a little too wet, and so on and so forth. And so I found that for troubleshooting, sometimes a colander is just the best way to go. Spread out your wheat berries, put it over a bowl, cover it with a little tea towel, and just wait each day as you dampen them, let them drain, and before you know it, they'll be sprouted. Well, I'm going to let these soak tonight, and tomorrow morning we'll take a look at them and we'll see how they're doing. Now, these wheat berries have been soaking in filtered water for 24 hours now, and I want you to see they're just beginning to sprout. There's just tiny little white pieces starting to come out through the wheat berries or the wheat grain. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put those back in, and I'm going to strain the water out, and then I'm going to show you what the next step is. Now, I've drained these wheat berries and they're quite moist and plump, and the next thing that I'm going to do is simply try to work them up the sides like this. Now, some people will do this in a jar, and you can certainly do that, and then you lay it on its side and you put a little mesh or cloth cap on the bottle, and then rinse the berries every day and wait until they sprout. I prefer to do it this way. I find that there's a lot less chance of getting an off flavor or any chance of mold. There's just a higher level of aeration doing it in a strainer like this. And I find that they sprout quite nicely and quite quickly, especially giving them the start of the overnight soak. So all I'm going to do is just work them gently up the sides like this. Then I'm going to put these that's good. I'm just going to put these, I'm going to bring the bowl back, and I'm going to put these over the bowl, and that'll help catch any water that drains off. Then tomorrow I'm going to spray them again and just moisten them up, and then again move the wheat berries up the sides of the strainer, and then again in the evening I'll moisten them again. And what I usually do is, I don't do this with spring water or filtered water. I do use water from the tap. I usually just let it sit out overnight or boil it and then let it cool to get rid of any of the chlorine that might damage the wheat berries as they're sprouting. But I don't use bottled water or filtered water. You have to give them a good rinsing, and I try to keep this as economical as possible. So I do use tap water, and I've never had any trouble. You know, as I said, I just give it a little time to let the chlorine evaporate. And so that's it. Just push it up the sides like that, and then we'll let this sit, and then tomorrow we'll rinse again in the morning, and then we'll rinse again in the evening, and we'll let it sit. The way these are going, I think they're going to sprout quite quickly. As I said, it can take, counting day 1 as the soaking day, and then day 5 as the final day for sprouting. So it can be a 1 to 5 day process. However, I think these are going to sprout a little quicker. They're very fresh, and that does make all the difference in the world. Well, our wheat berries, our wheat grain, has now started to sprout. And you might recall, we soaked these overnight, and then we drained them and put them in this colander, and then just kept them moist by watering them or rinsing them twice a day with filtered water. And now it's been couple of days, and you might be able to see that I'm just going to get a few into my hand. They'll still feel moist, and you might be able to see all the little sprouts. Okay, now that you've soaked and sprouted your grain, we're going to move on to the next step. Now, I just want to mention one thing. I'm a home cook. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, I have nothing to do with the medical establishment at all. But what I want to say is that I am a fan of integrative medicine, of people like Dr. Andrew Weil, the Harvard-educated doctor who believes in taking advantage of what modern medicine has to offer, but also looking at what we might think of as traditional or old-fashioned medicine, home remedies, things like that. So I want you to know I like both, and I know some of you get a chuckle out of me when I tell you this, but I always do recommend that if you are sick, see whatever medical professional you like to see to help treat you. You might see a medical doctor, a family nurse practitioner, a naturopath, whatever the case may be. Is home remedies are great, but if you feel sick, and this is something that I'm kind of very conscious of because I'm in my late 60s, close to 70 now, and my husband and I recently came down with that bug that was going around after, well, it started, I guess, before Christmas. We got hit with it on the 26th, December 26th. Can you believe it? Right after Christmas. And it was the mutation that they're calling the super flu. And we are very blessed. We have a wonderful family doctor, and he really understands me. He really gets me. He understands my desire for home remedies and all of that. But I also know when, especially at my age, these things can sometimes really throw you for a loop and be a little harder to recover from, even when you run a traditional foods kitchen. And so I'm grateful for that. And so that's what I do. He is a medical doctor, and I do turn to him, you know, for conventional medicine, but then I also like my traditional home remedies as well. So I just want to tell you what I'm sharing with you is what I like to do, but I'm in no way giving you any medical advice. Definitely, you know, talk with whenever you're not feeling well, or if you found that you feel your microbiome, you know, in your digestive tract is off track, and you want to take fermented beverages, but you also want to talk to a medical professional, I think that's excellent. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take these sprouted wheat berries and we're going to transfer them to a half-gallon jar. Now once you get your sprouted grain into your jar, all you've got to do is fill this jar with water. You don't need anything else, no salted brine, nothing like that. And you're probably going to need about 6 cups. It really depends on how much your grain expands, what type of grain you're using, and how much it expands. And you're just going to want to fill it up to kind of right below the neck of the jar, because you do want to allow room for a little expansion. Oh, that's my sweet pup, Indy. He hears something at the front door. Now, I like to use filtered water, like a bottled water, or if you have an RO system in your house, something that helps remove some of the chlorine, or you're using a chlorine-free water, like a bottled water. And the reason for that is whenever we're fermenting, we want to do everything in our power to help the ferment be successful. Now, this is a very easy ferment, and it's not super fussy, so if all you have available to you is tap water, you can use that, but I generally like to use some sort of filtered water with all of the ferments I make. And the reason is chlorine can sometimes tamp down the fermentation process. And so, as I said, I just like to try to make things as successful as possible, because if you've been with me a while, you've heard me say this a lot, ferments can be persnickety. And the more we can do to help our ferment, the better. Although I have used chlorinated water, sometimes I find it takes a little longer, but overall, if you can use filtered water or bottled water, something like that, that'll be great. All right, now once you get this into your jar, and you know, I like to leave a little breathing room, you know, with all my ferments, because sometimes as the ingredients in it ferment, there can be some bubbling over and things like that. So giving it a little room is always good. And then if you've got the clean handle of a wooden spoon or a chopstick, whatever you got, I like to just start with a good stir, just to get all of that water down there and kind of loosen up the grain a little. but don't worry about it. This is not an exact science, and this is something our ancestors have been doing forever. All righty. And then that's it. Now you just go ahead, put your cloth, your paper filter on top, whatever you've got, your rubber band, and boom. Now, you want to put this somewhere in your kitchen undisturbed, but I recommend leaving it out and not putting it in a pantry so that you do see it and it reminds you to stir it a couple of times each day. You're just going to take this off, you're going to give it a stir, and then because we want to incorporate the acetobacter from the air, because that's what helps ferment this drink. And if your kitchen's 65 degrees Fahrenheit like mine, or if it's 80 degrees Fahrenheit, say you're doing this in the summer, and my kitchen would be 80 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. Whenever you're doing this, the nice thing, again, as I said, this is easy to make. This is very forgiving. If your kitchen is 65 degrees Fahrenheit, it'll probably take 3+ days to ferment. If you've got a very warm kitchen, if it's 80 degrees in your kitchen, it'll probably be fermenting nicely within 2 to 3 days. And how do we know that it's fermenting? First of all, you're going to start to see bubbles appearing. And once that happens, you know, okay, we're on the right track. And then you'll notice when you remove the paper to give it a stir, it's going to start to develop kind of a yeasty sort of smell. And then as it kind of progresses along, it may take on kind of it's hard to describe, maybe a little vinegary, a little sour, but not unpleasant, kind of yeasty, sour, vinegary type of aroma. And generally at, around 3 days, you can give it a taste, see if you like it. If so, you can go ahead and strain it, but don't discard the wheat berries. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then you have your beverage to enjoy. How much to drink, how often to drink it, this is really up to you. If you're completely new to Rejuvelac, maybe you want to try a small cup, maybe 4 ounces, and see how it agrees with you. And then each day, maybe 4 ounces, until you use it up. This isn't something I necessarily feel you have to make every day and drink every day. I highly recommend that when it comes to ferments, any type of ferment, whether it's fermented vegetables, fermented fruit, fermented beverages, cultured dairy, which is also a ferment, that you eat a variety of fermented and cultured foods, because each one brings different types of good bacteria to the table, and in essence, to your gut. And having a variety of good bacteria is what we want to strive for. So, keep that in mind. And if you're new to just ferments in general, start slow, maybe even 2 ounces, maybe 1/4 cup, and see how it agrees with you. Now, I want to take a minute to talk about pH strips, because especially to those of you who are new to making ferments, you can sometimes be a little nervous. Oh, is it fermented enough? Am I on the right track? People worry, I don't want to get sick. I don't want to make anybody else sick. And I understand that completely. What will save the day for you are something called pH strips. You can find these very easily at a pharmacy, any of them that are out there, Walgreens, CVS, any of the pharmacies that are like in a Walmart or a Target or in your local grocery store. Pretty much all of them will carry pH strips. They're also very easy to find online. Amazon, I'll put a link in the description below so you can see exactly the ones I use, and I have them here. I can show you the brand that I like to use, Hydreon. I've used these for years. And I like this one. They come in strips. They come in all kinds of ways. I find this the most affordable. It just comes like in a little coil like this, and you just pull off whatever amount you need. I find this one to be the most affordable. I usually get these online on Amazon, and I'll put a link below. But again, you can find these pretty much anywhere. Often the ones you see at the pharmacy are like the individual little, it almost looks like a little stick. But how this works is you always want your ferments, no matter what you're making, to have a pH of 4.6 or lower. That means it's a high acid food. And why do we want a high acid food? Because in a high acid food, or in this case, a high acid beverage, bad bacteria cannot survive. And that's exactly what we want. We want a beverage that's going to be high in good bacteria, where the good bacteria has been allowed to thrive. And so what's nice is once you have your pH strip, so after 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, whatever, you're going to see it as the activity progresses, and you're going to be smelling it, and you're going to be smelling that kind of yeasty, vinegary aroma. You check it with your pH strips. They give you a nice little guide here. And when it gets sort of in this green range, you're getting in the 4.6 range. So this is a very handy-dandy thing, so to speak, for the beginner, to give you peace of mind. I've made things like this for years, so I'm kind of used to it. I know what to look for, what to expect, and so on and so forth. But when I was new to some of these beverages, because I grew up with a range of fermented foods and cultured dairy, but some things were new to me that I had not made with my mom growing up. And so, but I'm going to give you a little history about Rejuvelac. But this was something, my mother made something similar with grain. I think she used barley. She always liked barley. I think she would make a little fermented beverage with barley. But these give you a lot of peace of mind, especially when you're getting started with ferments. Now, Rejuvelac, the name, this was not a name that was common, to our ancestors. They had different names for their fermented grain beverages in whatever language, they were speaking, but Rejuvelac became very popular sort of in the mid-20th century. It was a woman, I think I saved her the information, Anne Wigmore, I put it here on my iPad. Maybe around the 1950s or so, when that sort of natural foods, hippie movement was, the beatniks in the 50s, was kind of starting to take off. A whole host of like natural foods. Eventually, I think it might have been by the 1970s, the New York Times cookbook series even came out with the New York Times Natural Foods Cookbook. Everybody was kind of getting on that, the mid to late 50s, the 1960s, the 70s, getting into all these natural foods, And I think I've shared with you in the past, my sweet mother, Gloria, who lived to be almost 100 years old, she was a very, very pretty, very refined lady, always had her pearls on and her pearl earrings. And her dress and her little hostess apron. But she had the heart, I always say this, she had the heart of a crunchy granola mama. And she was making all these types of things, when I was growing up. We always had homemade yogurt, and she was always scouting out sources for whole wheat flour and whatnot, and natural sweeteners and things like that. But you can't go wrong with making something like Rejuvelac. Because it's easy to make, it's very nutritious, it's loaded with vitamins and minerals, plus the good probiotics for good gut health. And that's very important. And because it's an Acetobacter type ferment as opposed to a lactobacillus ferment, again, it's introducing different types of good bacteria. This is more like a raw apple cider vinegar or something like that. And speaking of that, I just want, I have videos where I show you how to make your own homemade raw apple cider vinegar. And is it official apple cider vinegar? No, I always say unless you have a big apple orchard and you've got plenty of real apple cider to spare, fine, you can make real apple cider vinegar. I just use apple peels or apples getting a little past their prime, or whatever the case may be. It's basically an apple scrap vinegar, but it's a raw vinegar. It tastes just like apple cider vinegar. It looks just like apple cider vinegar. You can make it at home, and it costs you about 50 cents as opposed to whatever they charge today at the supermarket for it. But I want to mention things like Rejuvelac, these ACV drinks you see around, and all these like probiotic type sodas you see today and different types of drinks. And they're often very expensive. They can hover around $3 or more a bottle or a can, however they're sold. And as you see, these can be made very simply, very easily, and very affordably. And I have a whole playlist on how to make a whole host of fermented beverages, fermented sodas, and I'll be sure to link to that below. And if you have the Modern Pioneer Pantry, I have a lot of fermented beverages in there, including a homemade, fermented strawberry soda and different things like that. So I recommend that you practice and try different things and see what you like. Everybody's palate is different. You will find that there are certain things that you really find very flavorful. Maybe other things are a little strong for you, but in time, as you become more adjusted to drinking fermented beverages, you might find, I do like that, as time passes. Now, what to do with this once you strain it? You will want to refrigerate. You can certainly drink some right then and there, but you will want to put this into your refrigerator. And ferments generally like to be around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The door of your refrigerator is a very good place to store them, the inside of the door. The top shelf or the bottom shelf, wherever, it depends, whichever is the warmest part of your refrigerator in terms of the interior. But the door is a very good place to store ferments if you have shelves in the door. What to do with the grain? Now, do not discard this grain. You're going to treat this grain like you would any other grain. What I like to do and what I would recommend, yes, could you dry this out in the oven or a dehydrator and then grind it into a flour and basically have an interesting fermented flour that would be fun to use, making a sourdough bread or something like that, because it will have a different flavor than if you had just started with the sprouted flour or regular fresh milled flour. But what I recommend and what I think is very tasty is to simply, once you drain this, it's already wet, don't worry about it, put it into a saucepan. And now this is a lot because we started with 2 cups of grain. So you're going to, and this is the whole grain, it's not cracked, it's not flaked, it's simply the whole grain. So what I generally recommend is adding to this 2 cups of whole grain, 4 cups of water. You can do a little pinch maybe of sea salt, bring this up to a boil, and then let this slow simmer until it's fully cooked. You may need, keep an eye on it, and every grain depends what grain you're going to be using. Every grain is different, and just keep an eye on it. You may have to add more water. And once it's cooked, it'll kind of flake like rice or barley. Barley is a great one to do this with because that's a commonly eaten grain. But whatever grain you use, you can basically turn this into kind of a pilaf. You can toss it with some butter, some chopped veggies, some herbs, whatever you want to do. I think it's terrific, and I think it makes a wonderful side dish as opposed to rice, whether it's white rice or brown rice. The other thing to do is if you want to turn this into a porridge, maybe that you would eat for breakfast, like you would an oatmeal, and it's very tasty. As a matter of fact, I just had a whole grain porridge this morning for breakfast. But if you want to do that, you're going to need more water. And you may even need to go up to about 8 cups of water. 4 will make sort of the light, fluffy, pilaf type style grain. If you could add another 2 cups and see if that's enough to turn it into more of a, not soupy, but like a smoother porridge. I generally find that I'll need the total of 8 cups of liquid to really get it into the stage of a porridge that I like. And then whatever you want to add on, some chopped nuts, a drizzle of maple syrup, some yogurt, some fresh fruit. It's delicious. And it has just enough of a touch of a little bit of a tang to it, even after cooking, I like that. But if you do put some maple syrup or maybe you use sucanat, which is the dried sugarcane juice, or date sugar, you basically don't notice it at that point, any tang. But I kind of like it straight up. I'll add a little ghee maybe when I warm it up the next day, and it's very tasty. Now, before we go on to where I want to share with you a variety of other home remedies that I like to make that are good for boosting immunity, good for cold and flu season, and so on and so forth, I just want to mention that, and I'll put a link to this in the description below. If you want to sign up for my newsletter, and it's completely free, you can certainly do so with the link that's in the description underneath this video. And when you sign up for my newsletter, I send you a whole bunch of wonderful traditional foods related things, including my pantry list, which is, oh my gosh, I think it's 36 pages long, where I talk about all the different foods you might want to consider stocking in your traditional foods pantry. But I don't just leave you with lists. I have links to recipes for how, where I have videos showing you how to use all the foods that you stock, and so on and so forth. And it's a nice newsletter. It comes out every Saturday morning. I also let you know about any new video that I've released, along with a lot of good traditional foods information. As well as, speaking of grain, I have some wonderful newsletter exclusive coupon codes that various purveyors of traditional foods have asked me to only put into my newsletter rather than just like advertise out in the universe, so to speak. And I actually have an exclusive discount coupon code for Teton Ancient Grains. I love them. I don't know if you saw my interview with the owner of Teton Ancient Grains, Jade. He's just a delightful man, and he's really doing some wonderful things to bring back ancient grains like einkorn and emmer and spelt. But his big family farms grow a variety of grains, organic, just wonderful. And so if that interests you, be sure to check out the link for my newsletter in the description below. And he's a great source for grains, whether you're grinding them in your grain mill. And I use my mock mill. I've shared this with you before. I purchased that myself. This is not an ad. This is not sponsored, nothing like that. I use my mock mill grain mill. I'll put a link to the one I have in the description below. I'm so happy with it. I've had it for years now. And I grind my grain that I buy from Teton Ancient Grains. And I buy my grain from them. I actually do buy my grain from them. And I grind my grain and use that to bake with. It's just wonderful. They're a great source for einkorn, whole grain. They also sell the flour, so that's available to you too if you prefer not to have to grind your own grain. Well, now that you know how to make this wonderful probiotic drink, which is a great natural remedy for recolonizing your digestive system, let's move on and make a number of other home remedies that are perfect for January to get us through cold and flu season. Today I want to share with you an ancient natural remedy that's great for getting rid of a cold or flu. Well, this is a very easy remedy to make, and there's 3 variations, and I'll show you all 3. But the basis for all 3 is just a simple onion. And as I said, this is an ancient remedy. This goes back to Roman times and maybe even before. The onion was really revered in ancient times, and this remedy was used when people didn't feel well. And they would even hang onions in the room where the sick person was because they believed that the onion would draw out the illness from the person. And today we know that that makes complete sense because scientists have told us that the onion is very rich in antibacterial and antiviral properties. And it's these properties, these antibacterial and antiviral properties, that help fight infection. And not only is the actual onion, the inside underneath the peel, rich in these antiviral and antibacterial properties, the onion skin is also very rich in these properties. So to make this remedy, we're going to use the entire onion, skin and all. If you have an organic onion, great. But if your onion is just conventionally grown, don't worry, because onions are in the category of what's known as the clean 15. And so they generally have very little pesticides on them. Now, this isn't one of those recipes that's set in stone. Basically, any onion will work. If you have just sort of a medium-sized one like this that I can fit in my hand, that's perfect. If your onions are on the small side, then just use 2. And if your onion's real large, that's fine. It doesn't really matter. It's all going to come out great in the end. Now, all you're going to want to do is just get a little soup pot, and we're just going to pull off some of this skin. Sorry, I think that's sounds kind of crunchy probably, but we're just going to get off some of the skin to make it a little easier to cut. So just make sure you save all those onion skins and go ahead and put them in your soup pot. Then we'll just go ahead and cut our onion, and there's really no specific way, but we just want to expose the flesh but leave on the skin. Then just go ahead and add all these cut pieces to your soup pot. Perfect. Alrighty, I want to get every little last piece of the skin there. Then you want to get 32 ounces of water. That's 4 cups. And you just want to go ahead and pour this right over your onions. Now at this point, this is your very basic remedy. And you can take this over to your stove and put this on high, bring it up to a boil, cover it, turn it down to low, and let it simmer for 30 minutes. Then after 30 minutes, you'd strain out your onions and you'll have your onion broth. At that point, you can drink it simply as is. Some people find it a little strong, and so it can be helpful to maybe add in a little sea salt and a little ghee. Adding these things can make it very palatable. And sea salt is great because it's rich in minerals, and ghee is simply a type of clarified butter where the milk solids are removed. So it's very easy to digest, because sometimes when people have a cold or flu, any dairy product, or specifically like with the milk solids in it, can make people feel a little nauseous or create some phlegm. So by using the ghee, which is very easy to digest, where all the milk solids have been removed, it helps you assimilate the nutrients in the onions and also give the onion broth a nice flavor. And if for any reason you don't like the mouthfeel of having a little bit of fat in a hot broth, you can put your broth with your ghee and your sea salt in a blender and whirl it and make it into a little bit more of a frothy drink. And then you can drink it that way. Similar to like when people make those bullet coffees and things like that. And given that you've added 4 cups of water to this broth that you're making, you'll have a couple of batches to drink throughout the day when you're not feeling well. But you can take this broth up another level. Another ingredient that was revered in ancient times is garlic. And if you can handle garlic, you're going to want to add that to your onion broth in the making. Now, garlic is very rich in antibacterial and antiviral properties, just like onions are, including the skin. Now, I know sometimes when people are not feeling well, they can find garlic difficult to tolerate. They can find it may cause them to have maybe a little acid indigestion or a little reflux, things like that. But generally in the broth, it should hopefully be mild enough to be tolerated. But if you do find that you have problems with garlic, then you can certainly leave this out. The onion broth just as is perfect. But we're going to go ahead and boost this, and we're going to add this entire bulb of garlic. And all we're going to do is, first I'm going to just try to get some of this, sorry, I think it sounds crunchy. I'm just going to get some of this garlic peel off of here, garlic skin, get every little bit in there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this right in half to expose all the cloves. Alrighty. There we go, we've got that cut, and I'm just going to go ahead and drop that down into my soup pot. Now, if you want to stop at this point and just make your onion and garlic broth, that's perfect. But if you want to try the third variation, then we're going to add in some fresh ginger. And now if you've left out the garlic and you just want to go ahead and add in fresh ginger to your onions, that works too. Now I've got about a 3-inch piece or so. here of ginger, and this is fresh ginger. If you have powdered ginger, the ground powdered ginger, you can certainly use that as well. You'd probably want to start with about maybe a half a teaspoon up to a teaspoon, and then taste it and experiment and see what you like, so that it's not too strong. Now my ginger is organic, so I'm not going to peel it, but if your ginger isn't organic and you want to peel it, certainly you can go ahead and do that. But I'm going to use the whole thing, and ginger, like its onion and garlic friends here, is very high in antibacterial properties, antiviral properties. And the nice thing about all of this, we're really focusing on antibacterial and antiviral properties. These also have anti-inflammatory properties. So that's nice, because when you are feeling sick, you do have a lot of inflammation. So it helps on that level as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to chop this up just into slices like this, to try to release as much of the ginger juice as possible. And I'll go ahead and put that right into the soup pot along with the onion and the garlic. Ginger, we know today, is wonderful for us. So I really like to add that to this onion broth, whether you put in the garlic or not, because overall I find that the ginger really helps add a nice level of flavor, especially if you find that just the plain onion broth is a little strong for you. The ginger, although does have a strong flavor, it helps moderate, so to speak, the onion flavor, and it makes for a broth that I think is actually very soothing. Well, I'm going to go ahead and put this on my stove. I'm going to bring it up to a boil, and then we'll put the lid on. We'll turn it down to the lowest setting that I have on my stove, and then I'll let it simmer for about 30 minutes. Another thing I want to mention about the ginger, if when you have a cold or the flu and you feel like you have the chills, ginger can be wonderful for helping you feel better and feel relieved from that feeling of chills, because it's a very warming spice. While that's simmering on my stove, I just want to share with you my thoughts about integrative medicine. If you've been with me for a while, you've probably heard me talk about this before, but it's an area I find very fascinating, because it takes the best of modern medicine, but it supports that with these traditional remedies, these home remedies, these natural remedies, as well as many other things. And because I really believe, when you're sick, you definitely want to be in touch with your doctor. You don't want to take any chances, and often, especially depending on what level of illness that you have, that might be very serious. And there are a lot of things that modern medicine can do to help us. Yet it's so nice to have these home remedies and natural remedies in our arsenal, so to speak, to provide us with some soothing comfort. And also these natural remedies can help, build up our immunity and boost our immunity. And also in the case of if you're eating onions or garlic, these are known as prebiotics, and they feed the probiotics. I'm saying that right. I know, probiotics, I think. But in any event, the prebiotics fill the probiotics, and the probiotics are that good bacteria that live in our gut. And scientists tell us that the more good bacteria we have in our gut, the healthier we are. And speaking of the onion that we used, and the garlic and the ginger, even after we strain the broth, don't throw those out. You can do various things with them. You can puree them, and then you can add them to soups, or you can just put them in a bag and throw them into your freezer. And then when you get ready to make bone broth, which we've made a lot of bone broth together, when you get ready to make bone broth, you can just pull out those scraps and throw them into your bone broth. Might a lot of the nutrition be extracted from them by the broth we're making today? Yes, but I always feel there's always a little something more that you can pull out of these things, and so there's no need to throw it out. But speaking of integrative medicine, if this is a topic that interests you, where modern medicine is also combined with traditional types of medicine and healing practices, I highly recommend books by Dr. Andrew Weil. I really find him fascinating. He's a Harvard-educated medical doctor, and yet he went ahead and founded the School of Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona. And this school is in conjunction, I gather, with the medical school, where doctors can go, or doctors in training maybe, or maybe even people who already are doctors who want this additional training, can go and learn about all of the various alternative medical practices, medical remedies, so on and so forth, that are alternative to modern medicine. And so by educating these doctors, they know all the modern things, but now they learn all of the traditional ways of healing. And then they're able to integrate them into treating their patients. And I just think that's wonderful. So if you open the description underneath this video, I'll put some information about Dr. Andrew Weil, if that's a subject that interests you, integrative medicine. And speaking of the description, if you open the description underneath this video, look for the word recipe, and there'll be a link to it, and you can click on that. It'll take you over to my website, and you can print out the recipe to what we're doing today. And it's very basic, but I'll have some variations and some other information over there that you might find helpful. And if you're interested in immune-boosting foods and natural home remedies, I'll be sure to link to my playlist where I have all the videos that I've done on this subject. And I'll put that in the iCards, and I'll also put that in the description below. So I think you'll find that very interesting. I've made turmeric tea, I've made mineral broths, I've made elderberry syrup, all sorts of things. There's many various home remedy recipes and immune booster recipes in that playlist. Well, I brought this up to a boil, I covered it, and then I turned it down to low, let it simmer for 30 minutes, and now we're ready to strain it. Well, this turned out to be a lovely golden color. Now, I used a yellow onion. If all you had was a white onion or a red onion, you can certainly use that too. They're all very similar. Some bring little different benefits, little different properties to the broth, but any onion will work. Now I'm going to go ahead and just strain out the broth from the solids. Now, as I said, don't discard this. You can blend this up with a little of the broth or other broth that you might have, and then you might just have to strain out a few little bits that don't get completely pulverized, but you'll have a wonderful, very nutrient-rich soup. Or the other option is just save these, throw them into your bag, whatever you keep in your freezer or your fridge for your scraps for when you're ready to make bone broth, and then go ahead and just throw these in. Now at this point, you can drink this just as is, just like you would a tea. Or if you want, you can put a little sea salt. I just have the wet gray sea salt here. It's the coarse ground. I like this one very much. It's very mineral rich. And you can go ahead and add that into your mug, and then go ahead and pour in your broth. I find that the salt does help with the flavor. Now we'll give this a taste as is, and then we're going to go ahead and add in the ghee, and I'll show you the best way to do that if you want to emulsify it. Okay, this is hot, but let's give it a try. I think you're going to find this really pleasant. With the ginger, it really helps moderate or soften the strong flavors associated with onion and garlic. And I just think this is so soothing also, just by the fact that it's a warm beverage when you have a cold or flu. Now, if you want to take this one step further and add in your ghee, now you could also add butter if that agrees with you, when you're under the weather. And if you want to just keep it completely dairy-free, you can add a little coconut oil. Now you can go ahead, what I've got here is a teaspoonful of ghee, and I feel that that's an appropriate amount for about this much of broth. This is somewhere between 8 to 12 ounces of broth. And then you can just go ahead and you can stir it right into your warm broth, and it'll just dissolve. And some people are fine with this method. And the nice thing about adding a little fat to this, if it does agree with you, is that, when you're under the weather, is that fat helps the body absorb the nutrients that are in onions and garlic and ginger, and also any kind of, vegetables. Now, some people don't, I'm just stirring this and letting it dissolve and watching it, but some people don't like the mouthfeel of when they add a little bit of fat to broth. They prefer to emulsify it, and then that way it almost becomes like a creamy type beverage, and it's quite pleasant. But we'll give this a try. Just as it is, you'll see that the fat does sort of congeal on the top. And some people don't have a problem with that, but other people, because in many ways it's kind of like chicken soup. When it's made with a whole chicken and the fat isn't strained off, and they leave that in because it does add nutrition when you're taking chicken soup, for a cold or the flu. And if you mix it up, it's not too bad at all. Oh, and that adds a really nice flavor. I really like that. But what I want to show you is that if you want to go ahead and blend it, it's very easy to do. I've just got my old Vitamix here. This is over 30 years old, but it's still going strong. But you can also do this in a regular blender. You don't need anything fancy. But I had this out on my counter in the back, so I figured I'd just go ahead and use this. And we're just going to go ahead and pour it in, and we're going to whirl it for about 30 to 60 seconds. So I'm just going to go ahead and try to do my best to get this in here without making too much of a mess. Perfect. Now, I want to mention that this broth will stay fresh in your refrigerator for at least 3 to 4 days, maybe even a little longer. But you can also make this in advance and freeze it and have it on hand when you do come down with a cold or flu, and not have to worry about having to make it. And you can go ahead and put this in your freezer. I like to store it in 1-cup containers or 2-cup containers, 2-cup size container. And it will definitely stay fresh in your freezer for at least 2 to 3 months without developing, any ice crystals. You could also put it into ice cube trays and just throw 1 cube into a cup of tea that has other flavors in it. So there you have a lot of options available to you. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put this on. And as I said, sorry, I'm just going to whirl this about 30 seconds or so. And, somewhere between 30 to 60 seconds will be enough to emulsify it. And whenever you're blending a hot liquid, you always want to make sure that you do vent it, that you let a little air out. So if you're using a regular blender and it has the little opening on top where sometimes a plastic piece goes on top, to keep things from sputtering out, you just want to loosen it a little so any steam can come out. My Vitamix does not have a top. This is completely open. So when I use it with hot liquids, I usually just put a, what's this called, dish towel over it. Alrighty, here we go. Well, I whirled this for just about 30 seconds, and it's beautifully emulsified. Look at that, and it's still quite warm. So I'm going to use my teaspoon to take a taste and see how this came. It's nice with a little bit of foam on top. Oh, that's nice. It tastes very similar to when the ghee was just melted in there, but it's kind of fun having that little bit of foam on top. It's got a little bit of a smoother flavor. So if this is something that you would enjoy, definitely try it. Try putting it in the blender. Well, I hope you'll give this a try. I think you're going to find it very soothing if you have a cold or flu. Today I want to share with you a 3-ingredient lemon hot toddy that's perfect for cold and flu season. Plus, it doesn't have any alcohol in it, but it's great for opening up the flanges whenever you feel congested. Now you can make this hot toddy by hand, or you can make it in a blender. I've just got a regular blender here, or you can make it in a high-speed blender, or you can make it in a food processor. But you really don't need any special equipment, and I'll show you how. It's very easy to make. Now let's go over the ingredients that we're going to need to make this hot toddy. But you don't need to write any of this down, because if you open the description under this video, there'll be a link that'll take you over to the printable recipe, or you can simply just read it online if you don't want to print it out. Now today we're just going to make 1 serving, but you can easily double, triple, even quadruple this recipe. The first thing that you're going to need is 1 whole lemon. Now this is an organic lemon, but if you don't have an organic lemon, don't worry, just give it a good washing. Next, what I've got here are red pepper flakes, and I've got just 1/4 teaspoon. This is the type of recipe that after you make it once, if you find you can handle a little more spice, you can certainly increase this. But I find 1/4 teaspoon of the red pepper flakes is perfect. Now, if you don't have red pepper flakes, don't worry. You can use any type of chili powder or hot pepper powder that you have. But if you do, since these are in the flaked form, you'll want to start with 1/8 teaspoon or maybe even a little less. And as I said, see what you can handle in terms of the heat. The next ingredient is a simple syrup. And this is a healthy simple syrup, and it's a ginger simple syrup. Now this is very easy to make. It's 1 cup of water mixed with 1 cup of honey, and then about 1/4 cup of grated ginger added into it, and it's allowed to steep for 24 hours in the refrigerator so that all the good properties of the ginger are infused into the honey. And I showed you how to make this in a previous video, and I'll be sure to link to it in the iCards and in the description below. But don't worry if you've not made this yet, because if you just want to do a quick version, I'm going to show you how. So these are the 3 ingredients that we're going to use, and the only additional ingredient, which I really don't count in the 3 ingredients, is water. And so what you're going to want to do is to boil some water in a tea kettle or a pot, because we're going to need 1 cup of boiling water. Now I've just boiled up some water in my tea kettle, and my blender has the 8-ounce mark, which is 1 cup. So I'm going to go ahead, and the first thing I'm going to do is just pour in my 1 cup of boiling water. Now, if you're just making this by hand, what you're going to want to do is get a heat-proof bowl or a heat-proof jar, whatever you have, and you're going to want to pour your water, your boiling water, into that heat-proof jar or bowl. And then for those of us who are using a blender, we just need to cut this lemon into a few pieces and remove the seeds. If you're doing this totally by hand, you want to just chop up your lemon as small as you can. Now, while I'm removing these seeds, I just want to mention to you that some people may just want to use the pulp of the lemon and the zest, because they may have heard, which is correct, that the pith, that's this white part here, is bitter. And that is true, it is bitter, but it also contains a lot of nutrients that are especially helpful when making a hot toddy. So I like to include the whole lemon so that I do have the pith in there. And also you want to keep in mind, since we are going to be using our healthy simple syrup that not only has health-giving properties, it also has a little bit of sweetness to it because of the honey. So that's really going to cover up any bitterness that would be associated with the pith. Now we just want to go ahead and place our lemon slices carefully into our boiling water here. Be careful when you do this. Don't just drop them in, because the hot water may splash up on you. Now, if you've not had a chance to make your ginger-infused honey simple syrup, this is the point where you'll want to go ahead and grate in some fresh ginger into your boiling water. And you'll want to start with about a teaspoon of freshly grated ginger. And then after you make this drink once, if you find you can handle a little more, you can handle a little more of the ginger flavor, you can certainly increase that over time. And the same is true if you're doing this in a heat-proof bowl. You've got your hot water, you've got your lemon, and now you'll grate in some ginger. Next, you want to take your red pepper flakes and sprinkle those right in. And that's it. Now we're just going to go ahead and blend this. Now, if you're just doing this in a heat-proof bowl, go ahead and add in your pepper flakes, and then take a wooden spoon or spatula, whatever you have, give it a good stir, and try to macerate best you can the chopped lemon into the hot water. Now I'm just going to loosen my lid here, but I am going to have it on there so nothing comes out. But I have found, everybody knows their blender. I've found that when I blend very hot liquids, it's best just to have this a little loose so that steam can escape. Alrighty, well, let's get ready to give this a blend. Now I blended this about 30 seconds, and that's really all you need. If you're doing this in a high-speed blender, it's probably going to take even less than that. And if you're doing this by hand in a bowl, maybe take about 60 seconds or so to really help the hot water soften your lemon, the cut-up lemon, and the red pepper flakes. Now we're going to get ready to strain this, and if this is still warm, like a cup of tea, perfect. If not, you can transfer this into a small pot and just warm it gently on your stove. But this is nice and warm, so I'm going to go ahead and strain it. I actually had my mug here, but I was thinking, I took this glass mug out because I was thinking it'd be easier for you all to be able to see how this looks. Now, those of you who've been with me for a while know that I'm a big fan of integrative medicine. I love making home remedies for the comfort that they can offer us, but definitely if you're sick, I firmly believe in taking advantage of all that modern Western medicine has to offer. So if you do get the flu, be sure to check with your doctor. Now, as I'm pouring this through my little strainer, I just do it little by little, and then I just like to press this lemon mash to make sure I get out all the goodness. Now, don't throw away this lemon mash. You can just freeze this like in ice cube trays or anything, like even just, in little container, whatever you want to do. And then add this to a little tea bowl and use it to make a nice cup of a sort of a spiced lemon tea. It'll be wonderful. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is now we're going to use our simple syrup. If you've not made this, don't worry. At this stage, you've already incorporated your ginger via the blender or in a heat-proof bowl if you've used it that way. And so you're going to just want to add a little honey. You certainly can drink it straight if you don't want any sweetener at all. That is really going to be a strong hot toddy. But if you want to add some just plain honey to it, you'll want to start with about a teaspoon and see how that flavors it, how you like the flavor. With this simple syrup, I'm going to add this ginger-infused simple syrup. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon, and that should be perfect. You can certainly add up to 2, depending on how much sweetness you like. But now let's give this a taste and see how it is. Oh my goodness. That is so good. That is going to give such a wonderful feeling to you if you need your flanges opened, if you have a cold or a flu. This is going to be wonderful. Today I want to share with you the best home remedy for colds and flu, made with simple ingredients I'm confident you have on hand. Well, this home remedy can be very soothing whenever we have a cold or a flu. However, when you are sick, be sure to check with your medical professional to make sure you get the proper care you need. Well, this home remedy starts with making a very simple soup, but one that's topped with a very unique mixture that's very helpful and soothing when we have a cold or a flu. First, we'll go over the ingredients that we need to make this simple soup. Then we'll make the soup. Then we'll go over the ingredients that we need to make the unique topping. Then we'll make the topping and put everything together. Now, the first ingredient that we're going to need is some type of fat. I'm going to use ghee. This is basically a clarified butter in which the milk solids have been removed, but you could also use butter. You could use a butter and olive oil combination. You could use some coconut oil, whatever type of fat you like to use to saute. Next, you're going to want some type of spicy pepper. I've got a Fresno here, but you can use whatever you like. You're also going to want about a 2-inch piece of ginger. You're also going to want a full bulb of garlic and 2 lemons. Next, you're going to want to have some onions. I've got spring onions here. You can use yellow onions, white onions, red onions. It doesn't matter, even leeks, whatever you've got on hand. And then you're going to want to have some flat leaf Italian parsley, or at least that's what I have. You can use the curly one too, but I think the flat leaf has a little nicer flavor. And then you're going to want some salt and pepper, plus you're going to need some liquid. Now what I've got here is 4 cups of chicken bone broth, and we've learned how to make chicken bone broth as well as a lot of bone broths together, and I'll be sure to link to that playlist in the description if that's something you'd like to learn. But in any event, as I said, I've got chicken bone broth here. If you don't have any bone broth on hand, and you can use chicken or beef or pork bone broth, whatever you like, you can also use water. It's going to be fine. Now what you want to do is put your soup pot on your stove top and set it to medium heat, and then you're going to want to just put about, approximately maybe a tablespoon of your fat into your soup pot. This isn't an exact science, so I don't want you to worry about trying to be too exact. as your fat starts to warm up on medium heat, go ahead and start to chop up your pepper. Now, if your hands are very, very sensitive, you can certainly wear those disposable gloves to do this job. But if not, usually cutting up one pepper won't be too spicy to your hands, hopefully. Now, little scraps you have like this, just save these and put them in your scrap bag. If you're making a bone broth and you want a little spice added to it, that's perfect to throw in. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and leave in the membrane and leave in the seeds. That's going to add, a nice spice. If you don't want it to be too spicy, you can take out the membrane and the seeds, and you'll have the flavor of the pepper, but a lot less spice. However, given that we kind of want to, as my mother used to say, open up the flanges when we have a cold or the flu, I'm going to go ahead and leave all the spice in here. Once you get your pepper all diced up, go ahead and add that right into your soup pot with that nice warmed fat. The peppers are starting to sizzle in the ghee. The next thing you want to do is take a spoon and use it to remove the skin or the peel, whatever you call it, from the ginger. And once you get off as much as you can, we're going to go ahead and dice this. And if you have a spoon that's a grapefruit spoon, it has a little bit of the serrated end, the serrated tip. It's wonderful for getting into those little crevices that can sometimes be a little hard to get the skin off. And basically, you just want to go ahead and chop this as finely as you can. Well, I chopped up this ginger, and now I'm just kind of running my knife back and forth over it to try to chop it as small as I can. Once you get your ginger finely chopped, go ahead and add that in with your peppers. Then just go ahead and mix your ginger around with the peppers, sauteing everything. You're going to get a wonderful aroma. I love ginger. And it's perfect for a soup when you have a cold and a flu, a cold or a flu, because it has so many wonderful healing properties. It's antiviral, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, and things like garlic and turmeric and onions and spicy peppers. All of these things have been extensively studied by scientists, and they have shown that they can be helpful at easing symptoms, of colds and flus. And I'll be sure to link to some of those interesting studies in the blog post that'll correspond with this video. And I also want to mention in the description below, as well as in the corresponding blog post, I'll also link to my home remedies playlist. And I have many recipes for making all sorts of things. And I have master recipes that show you how to make herbal teas and herbal salves and herbal oils and herbal tinctures and a whole host of other remedies, including an ancient remedy that starts with onions that so many of you have told me that is actually very tasty and very helpful when you have a cold. So I'll be sure to link to all of that. But basically what you want to do now is take your whole head of garlic and you want to cut it. What would this be? Lengthwise or crosswise, and just do the best you can. And once you get through it, we're going to only put half into our soup pot. Now don't throw out these garlic skins because these are very rich in nutrients, just like the garlic. So you can save them for the second step that we're going to go into when we make the topping, or you can simply add these to your scrap bag and use them whenever you want to add some garlic flavoring or nutrients to a bone broth that you may be making. I generally don't. I think I've shared with you in the past that I find the long simmer of the garlic in a bone broth can sometimes become a little bitter, but for other purposes, even if you're making an herbal tincture or something like that, I love saving all of my garlic skins. Now this half of the garlic I'm going to set aside for now, and I'm going to take this half, I'm going to go ahead and put this in my soup pot. I'm going to put it cut side down. Some of the garlic's already falling off. I'm going to put it cut side down. just to start warming the garlic, but I'm going to keep a close eye on it. You don't want to walk away from this. Nobody wants burnt garlic. And I'm just going to let that start to warm up and take on a little color and release some of its flavor. And if some of the cloves fall out, don't worry, that's perfect. Now we're going to go ahead and cut up some of our spring onions. As I said, if you're using some type of other onion, that's fine too. If you do have the spring onions, leave a few aside because those can be very pretty to add fresh into the soup. And when things like garlic and onions and other ingredients are cooked, they can sometimes help release certain nutrients and make them more bioavailable to our digestive systems. But sometimes, such as in the case of vitamin C, cooking it can also destroy some of the nutrients. So it's kind of, a double-edged sword. But what I like to do is at this point, since I'm using the green onions, I'm going to go ahead and just start to chop these up, and just small little pieces. Again, this is not an exact science. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. And I'll go ahead and add those into our soup pot. Now I'm going to go ahead and add in all of my chopped green onions. As you see, it's getting away from me. They're just tiny little pieces, about, what would you say, about a half or a quarter inch. Nothing fancy. So once you get your green onions in, just start to stir everything around. Get them nice and moistened by the fat that you've got in your saute pan. At this point, I like to turn the garlic over, and the bulbs, it's been warmed, so the bulbs are going to start leaching out into your soup, which is perfect. But don't worry, if some of them don't, that's fine too, because you'll see what we're going to do. Now you want to go ahead, just saute everything up, for about a minute more or so. Then go ahead and add in your liquid, whatever liquid you're using. Sounds good, nice sizzle. Now we're going to bring this up to a boil, and then we'll turn it down to like a medium or so, and we're going to let it simmer for about 10 minutes. So we're just going to let our soup simmer covered for about 10 minutes. But I wanted to mention that if you used green onions in this recipe, save the root. You can put this in a little glass of water and it'll start to sprout, and you'll have new spring onions or new green onions. You can also put it right into some dirt in a flower pot or right into your garden, and it'll start to grow green onions, and you may not even ever have to buy them again, which is nice. And if growing vegetables from scraps interests you, I'll be sure to link to a video I have, I'll put it in the description below, where I show you how to grow a lot of vegetables from scraps. Alrighty, now let's go over the ingredients that we're going to need for our topping, the topping we're going to put on our soup. And basically what this is somewhat of a version of a pistou, P-I-S-T-O-U. It's a French term, and generally when the French make a pistou, what they're making is something that has basil, olive oil, garlic, and it's whirled all together, and then it's put as a topping on a soup. Now we're going to make our pistou a little differently. And the reason is I want to bring in some ingredients that really help us feel better, help kind of maybe relieve a little bit of our symptoms when we have a cold and a flu. So yes, we're going to have the garlic, of course, and yes, we're going to have the olive oil, but we're also going to use some ginger and some hot pepper. I've got a jalapeno here. You could use another Fresno like I used in the soup, whatever type of hot pepper you like. And I'm going to go ahead and use some fresh parsley instead of basil. And the reason is that generally when we come down with colds and flu, it's in the winter. And basil is usually not in season in the winter. Yes, you might be able to find it at the grocery store, but you're going to pay a pretty penny for it. And usually in the cooler months is when your flat leaf or your curly parsleys are going to be in season. And they're usually just generally very easy to find any time of year at the grocery store and for a reasonable price. Now, what about these lemons? Well, we're going to use the lemon juice from these lemons in our soup, but we're not going to put this in while it's on the heat because we want to preserve as much of the vitamin C as possible. I don't know if this is just a wives' tale or if it's true, but my mother always believed that food was best eaten closer to room temperature than very hot. She would always say, oh, very hot food may cause infection or something like that. It might just be a wives' tale. But what we do know is that if we heat foods that contain vitamin C at very high temperatures, it does destroy some of the vitamin C. So we're going to let our soup cool down to a manageable, palatable temperature, and then we're going to go ahead and add in our lemon juice. However, we're also going to have the zest, the pith, and the pulp left over. So what we're going to do is add the zest and the pulp to our pea stew. So we're really creating something that's incredibly nutrient rich, nutrient dense, but something that also has such a host of ingredients in it that have antiviral, antibacterial, and anti-inflammatory properties. Now, what about the pith? The pith is the white part of the lemon or of any citrus, and it's very bitter, but it's also very nutritious. I don't mind the pith. So if I was making this pea stew just for me, I would go ahead and add in the pith. However, if you do find it bitter, don't throw it out. Just save it and set it aside. You can put it in your refrigerator or your freezer, and you can use the pith when you make homemade bitters. And if you've never made bitters before and that's something that you'd like to learn how to do, I'll be sure to link to my video where I show you how to make bitters in the description below. They're very easy to make, and using pith in a bitter is very appropriate, citrus pith, because as the name implies, it is bitter, but you want it to be bitter because the tiny little bit that you take helps improve your digestion and hopefully tamp down indigestion. Now I'm going to start preparing the ingredients for our pea stew, and I'm just going to basically push the garlic bulbs or the garlic cloves out of the bulb, but I'm not going to worry about being too exact about it. You don't need to get the skin out. As I said, the skin is very nutritious and has the same level of ingredients that the actual garlic clove does. And I'm going to leave the skins on because of that, and it'll be fine because what we're going to be doing is blending all of this in a blender. And you can use any blender that you have. You don't need a high-speed blender. I'm just going to use my regular old blender. If you have a food processor, you could also use that. And if you're exceptionally skilled, you can always chop all of this as fine as possible, and then using like a mortar and pestle or even a bowl, if that's all you have, you can start adding in and whisking in some olive oil and make your pea stew in a very traditional, old-fashioned way. If I have any cloves of garlic that have a very hard root here on the bottom, I'm just going to go ahead and remove that. And now I'm just going to go ahead and get the skin off of this ginger. This is actually an organic ginger, so if you have organic ginger and you want to leave the skin on, that's fine too. It's going to be well pulverized in the blender. But even so, I'm just going to go ahead and remove it. It's not very difficult to do when you have a spoon. And the nice thing about making a pea stew, whether it's the traditional one or something like what we're making here, is that cooking food is wonderful. It makes it very easy for us to digest. When it's warm, it's very soothing to us, especially if we have a cold or a flu. The bone broth is very soothing to our digestive system, helps us absorb all the nutrients. But it's also good to have some raw foods that you're adding into your diet as well, especially when you're trying to get better, from a cold or the flu. And the reason is raw foods contain enzymes that would otherwise have been damaged by heat. And enzymes serve a lot of purposes, and one is to help us better digest our food and absorb nutrients. So it's always nice, especially, whenever you look at traditional cultures or and traditional recipes, you will find that it's almost like inherent that our ancestors knew the best way to mix foods together for optimal nutrition. And that's exactly what we're going to do here today. Now this is all going to be going into my blender, so I'm just going to chop this into pieces that make it manageable for it, so it doesn't have to work too hard, but I don't need to be as precise in the chopping as I was for the soup, where we want it to be a little more palatable. Now this is a large jalapeno, but I'm going to go ahead and use all of it. I'm going to save this top in my scrap bag, and I'm also going to include the membrane and all of the seeds, because again, I do want something that is nice and spicy to help make breathing easier and sort of, as I said earlier, open up the flanges. Whenever you eat spicy foods, even when you're feeling great, you might find your nose runs a little bit, and that's exactly what we want, though, when we're not feeling well. We want to get all of that infection out of us. So again, I'm not going to be too precise since all of this is going into the blender. Now basically I'm just going to use a potato peeler to remove the zest. You could even zest the zest if you wanted, but since we are putting this in the blender, I'm not too worried about it being super small. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this zest off, because that's going to be part of our topping, and just go ahead and add that into our pile here of things that are going to go in the blender. Now this is the pith, the white that we're seeing, and some of it is going to be on the zest, especially if you use a potato peeler like this. It's not a perfect system, but I don't worry about it. If you are concerned about getting any of the pith into your topping, then you can use one of those little microplane graters, which will really control exactly how much zest you're getting off, and it's very good at leaving the pith behind. Now I'm just going to take a little bit of this fresh parsley and set that aside. Also, I'll chop a little bit of that up to sprinkle on the soup along with the green onions. But then this is going to be the base of our pea stew. But the nice thing is the blender is going to do the bulk of the work for us. And we're also going to include the stems, so nothing's going to go to waste. But I'm just going to give this a very rough chop. Well, our soup has simmered for about 10 minutes, and it looks terrific. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to pull that garlic out. That's why I kept it whole. And we'll see what other little cloves are in there. If they're real softened, I'll just mash them on the side of the soup pot. But if there is some that's still intact, I'm going to add that to our topping that we're going to put into the blender. And the reason is it's a nice combination to have not just the raw garlic, which can be somewhat strongly flavored, along with some cooked garlic that can have a sweeter flavor. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and set this soup aside and move my cooktop out of the way and bring the blender in. So now everything that we prepared, we'll go ahead and put into our blender. We've got all our garlic, our jalapeno, our lemon peel. This is going to be great. Now I'm just going to loosen this little top to my blender, whatever type of blender you have. You just want to have some area where you can start to little by little pour in your olive oil. And that's why I was mentioning earlier, if you have a food processor, it'll work great in that too. So what I'm going to start is I'm just going to put this on low and get it starting to blend, and then I'll start adding in the olive oil. At this point, I have about a half a cup of olive oil in here so far, and doing this in the blender, you probably will, like I'm doing, have to stop it halfway through and mix it a little bit, push some of the greenery down. And at this point, now that we've got this going, I'm going to remove the lid to the soup, and I'm going to fish out some of the cooked garlic. So I fished out some of the garlic that still was in sort of the main part of the bulb, and it's so Ah, so aromatic. I'm going to go ahead and add that into our mixture. Then at this point, I'm going to go ahead and add in about a teaspoon of salt. You could always wait to add some salt later if you like to limit your salt, but the salt really does help with the flavor. Now, in terms of pepper, I do have that large jalapeno in there, and I've got a Fresno in the soup, so I don't think I'm going to add any additional black pepper at this point. We'll wait to taste. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a little more olive oil just to kind of top that off, and then we'll go back to blending, and then we'll see how much more olive oil we need to add. Well, I added probably about a total of 1 cup of olive oil. It's really going to be a matter of you just keeping an eye on it and getting it to the consistency that you think is the most pourable and will mix well when put on top of your soup and then mixed in with your soup. Now I'm just going to take a little taste of this. I got a clean spoon here, and I'm going to take a little taste to see if I think it has enough salt. That is so tasty. I might go ahead and add just a little bit more salt to it, but it's wonderful, and it's really not overpowering. The parsley has helped tremendously to temper some of the pepper and some of the garlic so that you don't feel completely overwhelmed. It's spicy, but pleasantly so. Now, before I ladle some of the soup into the bowl and top it with the pea stew and give it a taste, we'll see how it all comes together, I just want to mention that this is enough to probably last you a week. And hopefully at that point you're feeling better. And you can store this in your refrigerator. This would probably even stay fresh for about 2 weeks in your refrigerator, but you could also make this in advance of even having any cold or flu, and then just freeze this in little ice cube containers. That would be wonderful. And then when you don't feel well, it's easy to pop one out and defrost it and top your soup with it. And you can really use this to top pretty much any soup. It's very flavorful. Now, the first thing that I want to do is cut these lemons in half, and we're going to squeeze the lemon juice into our warm soup. And you can do this, I'm just going to use my hand, but you can certainly use a little mesh strainer so you don't get any seeds in there. Now, if you had decided that you wanted to use the pith as well as the pulp in your pea stew to give it a little bit of a lemony flavor, you could certainly do that. But again, as I said, the pith does have that little bit of bitter flavor. So if you want to leave that aside, that's fine. But you could also cut your lemons in advance. Oh, I think a pit just went in. I got to fish that out. You could squeeze your lemons separately, put the juice aside, and then scrape out the pulp and go ahead and put that in the blender as well. I decided I'd just leave it as is. I kind of like the real garlicky flavor that this mixture has, kind of garlicky, a little spicy, even a little herbaceous, as they say, a little green. And I didn't want to overshadow it with too much lemon flavor, since we're going to have some nice lemon flavor in the soup. But be sure to save these. You can go ahead and put these in your scrap bag, and they can serve as the acid, I'm squirting over there, as the acid when you're making bone broth. I like to use like a little fermented. I like to use some vermouth or something like that, but you can also use some vinegar. You just want to use a little smaller amount than if you're using a wine or a fortified wine like a vermouth. But you can also use citrus. Again, you don't need much. And just throw those in your scrap bag. And then when you go to acidulate the water, when you're soaking your bones, just go ahead and throw those in. They're perfect. I love it. Nothing goes to waste. Well, this soup looks just wonderful. The garlic cloves that slipped out of the garlic bulb. I just kind of mashed those right in. They were beautifully softened. So I think it's going to make this a very tasty soup. Now I'm going to take a generous amount of our pea stew and just do a wonderful dollop right on top. Oh my gosh, this looks so good. Well, I'm just going to get a spoonful of this along with some of that beautiful bright green. It just really brightens the soup. Now, you could also put some chopped onion on top, as I mentioned, some of the spring onion, a little bit of the chopped parsley. You can do all of that. It's especially nice when you don't feel well that the food looks really appetizing. But I'm just going to go ahead and taste this and see how it came out. Oh, that's so good, and it feels so warming, and the lemon in the soup is wonderful. The pea stew is wonderful. It's so flavorful, and that's especially important when you don't feel well, because your taste buds sometimes, because of your nose being stuffed, your taste buds don't taste as well as they do when we're healthy. This is going to wake up your taste buds, and it's definitely going to get you breathing better. Today I want to share a home remedy with you for colds and flu that only uses 4 simple ingredients and can be ready in a minute. When I was a little girl, whenever I started to show signs of the sniffles, my mother would throw together this little home remedy for me to take. Chances are you have all of this in your pantry. All you're going to need is 1 lemon, about a 4-inch piece of ginger, and if you don't have fresh ginger, that's fine. You can use the powdered ginger as well. And then you're going to need about 4 cloves of garlic and a little honey to sweeten. And this is the perfect thing to make if you've not made your elderberry syrup, or you've not made one of your tonics like fire cider that require steeping and time before they're ready to take. If you're just feeling a little under the weather and you want something to bring you some comfort, you can have this ready in about a minute. Now we're going to use the whole lemon, and what I've got here is an organic lemon, but don't worry if you can't get an organic lemon. Usually what I do if my produce isn't organic, I give it a little scrub with a little baking soda, maybe mixed with a little vinegar, and wash it best I can and just proceed on with my recipe. Now if you're using fresh ginger, and whether it's organic or not organic, for this particular recipe, I really do like to peel it because I feel that the skin left on can just be kind of a little unusual feeling in your mouth if it's left on, even if it's pulverized. So that is your personal choice, but I would recommend if you're using fresh ginger to peel it. To start, what I'm going to do is just take a little bit of that tip off of the top of the lemon and the stem. And we're just going to start cutting this lemon up into various pieces. And as we go and we see any seeds, we're just going to remove the seeds. Now the lemon juice is very high in vitamin C, and the pith, this white part, and the rind, the zest, also contain various compounds that are antiviral, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, and can help comfort you if you are feeling a little under the weather. And now once we get the seeds out, we just want to go ahead and start cutting this up into just chunks, about 1 inch or 2 is fine. And I just want to say that home remedies are wonderful. As you know, I love traditional foods and I love home remedies. But if you are under the weather, definitely consult your doctor or your other healthcare professional, because I also believe that there are times when we need modern medical attention. And I like the idea of the integrative approach, where you take advantage of what modern medicine can offer, but then you also have some home remedies to give you comfort while you're recovering. Next, we're just going to take all of our chopped lemon and add it right into our blender. And you can use any kind of blender. I'm just using a regular blender, but if you have one of those high-speed ones, you can certainly use that too. And I'm just going to go ahead and scrape in any little last bits of juice that are on my cutting board. And next I've got my ginger here, about a 4 or 5 inch piece is fine, and you can use a spoon to scrape off the skin. It's very easy to do. I especially like to use a serrated grapefruit spoon, which makes the job even extra easier. So once I get all this skin off, then we'll just chop this up and we'll throw it into the blender. Now once you get your ginger all peeled, all we're going to do is just cut it up just into little pieces. Again, this is not an exact science. It's about 1/2 inch or so. Just something that you think will pulverize well in your blender. And we'll just go ahead and throw that in with our lemon. Next, you want to prepare your garlic, and all you're going to do is cut off the root. Just get that root out of the way. And then we're going to give this a smash and remove the skin. And then you can just give this a little bit of a rough chop. And again, just like we did with the ginger, we'll throw this right in with our lemon. And then we'll continue on with the rest of these garlic cloves. Now, depending on the size of your lemon and how juicy or not juicy it may be, I like to start with about 1/2 cup of water. So I'm just going to go in and add in about 1/2 cup. I've got a total of 2 cups here. I don't think we'll need all of that. I'm just going to start with about 1/2 cup, and we're going to start blending this, and we'll see if it's blending well, great. If it seems to be struggling a little, then we'll just add in a little more water. But we're going to want to blend this maybe for about a minute or two, depending on the speed of your blender, the strength of your blender, until it's like a fine pulp. Alrighty, well that took about a minute, and we didn't have to add any extra water. That 1/2 cup was perfect. And now basically what we have is a thick sort of lemon puree. Now the next thing that we want to do is just pour this into a measuring cup to measure how much we have. As I'm taking this out, it just smells wonderful. And I wanted to mention that don't worry, you don't have to write any of this down, because I will have a link in the description below that'll take you over to my website, which is the same name, Mary's Nest. And that'll be a direct link that'll take you right to this printable recipe. And I'll also have the information if you're using the powdered ginger or the ground ginger from your spice cabinet instead of the fresh ginger. You're going to probably use anywhere from a teaspoon to a tablespoon, depending on the strength of the ginger that you have. If it's been in your cabinet a while and is a little on the older side, you probably have to use a little more. But you're going to love the fragrance of this. The ginger helps compensate for the garlic. Well, this looks like we have just a scotch more than 1.5 cups. So at this point, you have some options. You can store this as is in your refrigerator in a jar, and when you feel the sniffles coming on, you can take a teaspoon of this. And you can take this a couple of times throughout the day. If you're a brave soul, you can take a full tablespoon of it. And this will stay fresh and potent in your refrigerator for about 2 weeks. But what I like to do, which is what my mother did to make it more palatable, was to add honey. And I like to add equal amounts, and that's why I measure what I have. So since I have about a little more than 1.5 cups, to this I'm going to mix 1.5 cups of honey. And you want to just use some type of pourable honey. And if you have raw honey, all the better. Now another option you can do before mixing this with any honey is to take an ice cube tray and just pour a little bit into each ice cube holder and then freeze this. And then once they're frozen, you just pop them out and put them into a freezer storage bag or a freezer container. And that way you've got those in your freezer and they'll last a year. And whenever you feel the sniffles coming on, you can just pull out one of the cubes, let it defrost, and you can take it straight as it is at that time or mix it with just a little bit of honey. So I'm going to take a taste of this as is and I'll let you know exactly how it tastes. That's got a kick to it. It's really not that bad. And definitely you taste the garlic, you taste the ginger, and you taste all of the lemon, the pith and the zest. It's all there. but it's really quite manageable. But I must confess, I do like it better with the honey. And I'll show you what I like to do. So I'm going to put this spoon aside, and I'm going to take a clean spoon, take some of our lemon mixture, and I'm going to go in here and get a little bit of our honey. Yeah. There we go. And add that in. And now I'll tell you what that's like. Alrighty, I'm just going to give that a little mix. Oh, it smells good with the honey. See how this is. That's a very pleasant addition. I highly recommend using honey. So if you want to make this in advance and have it on hand, just freeze it in little portions, as I mentioned. If you're feeling a little under the weather right now, make a batch up, take a couple of teaspoons throughout the day, or tablespoons, or go ahead and mix it with honey. If you want, you can mix the whole batch at one time and just store it in a jar together with the honey and the lemon mixture all mixed together. But if you think you might not use that within the next couple of weeks, then just keep them separate and mix them together when you're ready to take them. Well, if you feel the sniffles coming on, I hope you'll give this easy and quick home remedy a try. Today I want to share with you how to make turmeric tea to boost your immune system and ward off colds and flu. Well, turmeric tea is very easy to make, and the basic recipe is only 4 ingredients, 5 if you count water. But the nice thing about turmeric tea that really has in common with so many of these healing herbal spice mixtures is that you can customize this to add additional herbs and spices to not only improve the nutritional and healing benefits, but to also change the flavors. Now, you don't need to write anything down because I'll put a link in the description below. You'll see the word recipe and just click on the link next to that, and that'll take you over to my website where you can read the recipe online or print it out, and I'll have the basic recipe plus all the possible customizations that I recommend. And also in the description below and the pinned comment, because I know for some of you that's a little easier to find, I will have timestamps that'll walk you through the basic recipe and then timestamps where I talk about the different ways you can customize your turmeric tea. So first I want to talk about the benefits of turmeric, but if you already know that and you just want to jump ahead and get ready to make the tea, then be sure to check the timestamps. Now, why is there so much talk about turmeric being so beneficial for us, so healing, so medicinal, so on and so forth? Well, we're very fortunate that over the years, scientists have studied turmeric, and they have found so many wonderful healing and medicinal properties that are contained in this very simple root. And if you're not familiar with fresh turmeric, this is what it looks like. It's just a whole piece, very similar in many ways if you're familiar with fresh ginger. Turmeric is very similar. It's got that sort of papery type skin, similar to ginger, and you can either peel this and just use like a spoon, or I find a serrated grapefruit spoon works very well, just the same way I would peel ginger. And then when you slice this open, it's orange instead of the pale whitish or pale yellow that ginger is. Now, I know when I've talked about turmeric before, some of you have told me that finding fresh turmeric can be difficult for you. And I understand that completely, but you don't need to worry because you can always use the ground turmeric in any of the recipes where I talk about using turmeric, whether it's the fresh or the ground. Either will work. And today when we make the tea, I'm going to use the ground turmeric because I know most of you can find this. This is very easy generally to find in your grocery store in the spice aisle. Now, in the blog post where the recipe is that corresponds with this video, I'll have a lot of links to different scientific articles, if that's the type of thing that you really enjoy reading, that talks in detail about how scientists studied turmeric and what they found. But just to quickly summarize, basically, turmeric is a wonderful antioxidant. And what does that mean, antioxidant? It basically fights oxidation in our body. And oxidation is something that's damaging. It's often something you may have heard the term free radicals. And these free radicals are sort of going around ravaging our body, and antioxidants put the brakes on them. And so the more antioxidants that we eat, you hear in fresh fruits and vegetables and green tea and coffee and things like this, the better off we are. Scientists tell us the healthier we'll be, the more we incorporate antioxidants into our diet. And specifically, the ingredient that scientists tend to study that's in turmeric is something called curcumin, and I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's curcumin that is credited with a lot of these health benefits, with a lot of these medicinal properties. And so scientists have found that this curcumin and other compounds that are in turmeric, but not as strong or as in great at the same proportion as the curcumin, which is sort of the leader of the group, so to speak. But what scientists have found is that this curcumin has all types of wonderful properties: anti-inflammatory, antiviral, antimicrobial, antibacterial. I mean, it's really in many ways a wonder spice. And specifically, when it comes to colds and flus, scientists have found that curcumin and all the other compounds that are in turmeric, when made into a tea, can be very soothing and healing when you have a cold or the flu, or it can actually boost your immune system to help you fend off colds and flu. Now, there is one drawback to all of this. Curcumin can be difficult for us to absorb, but there's a little trick. There's an ingredient, and I think it's pepperine, something, it's pronounced something like that. But there's an ingredient in black peppercorns, in these whole black peppercorns, that contains this ingredient that helps our body absorb the curcumin and the other compounds that are in turmeric. So whenever you're making a turmeric tea or even cooking with turmeric, it's always beneficial to add in some black pepper. Also, when it comes to cooking, turmeric, being fat soluble, benefits very well if in your cooking you include some high quality fat like a butter or a ghee. So there's nothing to keep you from, when you make your turmeric tea, maybe having a little buttered toast on the side. Tea and toast, I think it's perfect when you're under the weather. But even when you don't have a cold or the flu, drinking turmeric tea, as I mentioned earlier, can help boost your immune system. So you can never go wrong with enjoying a cup of turmeric tea. And scientists tell us that it's also good for brain health and heart health. It really, as I said earlier, it's kind of the wonder spice. So drinking turmeric tea on a regular basis is wonderful advice. Now today, I'm going to make two 12-ounce cups of turmeric tea, one for me and one for my husband. But you can make this in larger batches very easily. This doubles, triples, and quadruples very well. And once it's made, you can store the tea in your refrigerator and then warm it later when you're ready to enjoy it, or you can even enjoy it cold during the summer months. Alrighty, now let's make the tea. Well, the first thing that you're going to need is 3 cups of water, and this will yield us the 2 12-ounce cups of turmeric tea. Next, you'll just want to decide if you're going to be using fresh turmeric or if you're going to be using the ground dried turmeric. If you're using the powdered turmeric, then you just want 1 teaspoon. If you're using the fresh turmeric, you're going to want about 1 tablespoon of freshly grated turmeric. And basically you could just try starting with maybe a little 2-inch piece. That should yield you about a tablespoon of grated turmeric. Now for the black pepper, you can use either the whole peppercorns or you can use freshly ground black pepper. And you want to use freshly ground black pepper if you can, because once the whole peppercorns are ground, they tend to lose a little bit of their beneficial properties. So if you do have a little pepper grinder, great, or you can just go ahead and use the whole peppercorns. If you're going to use whole peppercorns, you're going to want 16. If you're going to use the freshly ground black pepper, you're going to want about a half a teaspoon of the freshly ground black pepper. But if you can use the whole peppercorns, I find these work a little better because it's a little easier when you go to strain your tea. Unless your mesh strainer is really, really fine, sometimes the freshly ground black pepper will go through your strainer and it'll be in your tea. Now, if you don't mind that, it's not a big issue. But if you want to make it easier to strain, the whole peppercorns work great. Now, those are the two basic ingredients to make the tea. Next, what you're going to need, what you're going to put in after you make the tea, is going to be some honey to sweeten. Now, yes, if you don't want to use honey, you can definitely leave it out and just drink it as is, or you can use one of the natural low-cal sweeteners or low-cal, no-cal sweeteners like a stevia to sweeten it. That's certainly fine to do. But if you're already fighting a cold or fighting the flu, you may find a little bit of honey in there can be very soothing, especially to your airways, your throat and your bronchial passages. So that's something to keep in mind. But if you can't take any sweetener, then yes, definitely you can use one of the low-cal or no-cal sweeteners. Next, we're going to add in some lemon juice. And this is, again, once we've already made the tea and we've taken it off the heat. And the reason is we don't want to put the lemon juice into the tea when it's simmering because the vitamin C is susceptible to the heat. And not only can you put in the juice of the lemon, you're going to want the juice of one whole lemon, and you're going to divide the juice between the two cups, the two 12-ounce cups of turmeric tea. Now, if you're not using any sweetener, yes, you can cut back on the amount of lemon that you add. And can you leave it out? Yes. However, it is nice because the lemon juice is very high in vitamin C, and you can even take a little bit of the rind and you can just kind of do a little twist like that to release some of the essential oils. I'll show you when we get to that part. If you want to add a little bit of that, the essential oils in, which are also very beneficial and very rich in antioxidants for us. But again, you don't want to put the zest into when you're actually simmering the turmeric and the black pepper. And the reason is the zest and the pith, all of this is very high in vitamin C and can be easily damaged by the heat. So these are the two ingredients. We're going to start with the turmeric, the ground turmeric and the black pepper, and then we'll add the honey and the lemon next. Now let's take a minute to talk about some possible combinations where you can customize your turmeric tea, maybe based on different nutrients you would like to add in, or maybe different symptoms you're having that you're hoping to comfort with herbs and spices. The first one I want to talk about, which is really a good spice to keep in your cabinet, and that's cardamom. And it kind of goes hand in hand with turmeric tea in many ways because it's very, turmeric tea is originally a recipe that has been developed in India along with the turmeric golden milk, which you may be familiar with. I showed you how to make that a while back. And I show you how to make a golden turmeric mix, which you can just keep handy in your pantry. And then whenever you need to make up a batch, you can just add it, the powdered mixture that I show you how to make, right into your milk, and boom, your golden milk is done. So I'll be sure to link to that in the iCards and in the description below. Because that's just wonderful too if you're really feeling under the weather. I used to give that to my son and he'd say, "The milk is yellow." But it's very healing, and you can make it with things that are non-dairy as well. So if milk doesn't agree with you, yes, you can use coconut milk or things like that. But in any event, I use some cardamom in there. So, but talking about cardamom, it's very good for digestion. Now, if you feel the turmeric may be a little hard on your stomach, that's why I highly recommend turmeric tea as opposed to taking turmeric pills, because turmeric can sometimes be a little strong for some people. But adding in a little cardamom, this is ground cardamom here, and these are cardamom pods, which you can just crack and put right into your mixture. Either or will work. But as I said, wonderful for digestion. And so it can kind of help with this whole idea of taking turmeric in a tea form. But it also helps with things like nausea and different symptoms that can accompany when you have a cold or the flu. And so that can be very healing, very soothing, and kind of help tamp down the feeling of nausea. And if you've never had cardamom, I love it. It has a wonderful, almost like a lemony, kind of citrusy smell. And it is very soothing, and it's very tasty. So that's definitely something to think about. Now, if you have a cough accompanied with your cold or the flu, you may want to consider adding some thyme. And this is just some ground thyme, just dried thyme. Thyme contains an ingredient, and I believe it's pronounced thymol, but it is very soothing to the bronchial passages. And so if you have a cough, thyme can help soothe that. I even shared with you, if you've been with me a while, you may remember I showed you how to make a cough medicine, sort of a home remedy cough medicine using thyme. And it works really well. So you could add a little bit of dried thyme to your saucepan when you're simmering the turmeric and the black pepper together. The same with the cardamom. You would add these right in at that stage where you are simmering them on the stove. And I'll have all these directions in the written recipe with all these variations, so don't worry, and how much to use and so on and so forth. Next, if you're feeling really congested in your nasal passages and in your, as my mother would say, the flanges, the airways leading to your lungs, some red pepper can work great. And you can just use the crushed red pepper, or I've got some ground cayenne. Either any of this, any kind of hot pepper that you like, whether it's the flakes or in the ground form, will work great. And a little bit of that will really open up your airways and open up your flanges and should have you breathing a little better for a while. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Also, something that I really like to add to turmeric tea, and then again, all of these you would be adding in at the simmering stage on the stove. The only two you really need to worry about is your honey, and especially if you're using raw honey, and your citrus. And again, with the citrus, I'm going with lemon. You could use lime, you could use orange, you could use grapefruit, really whatever you have in your refrigerator will work great. All the citruses are very high in vitamin C. But one of the things that I really like to add is either some fresh ginger or some ground ginger. And either will work. And they are wonderful. Ginger, in many ways like turmeric, is a wonderful spice. It's one of these that really is a catch-all. It's anti-inflammatory, antiviral, antimicrobial, antibacterial, it's got a little bit of everything in it to help you. Also, it's a little spicy. So much like the red pepper flakes and the ground, in my case I have the cayenne, it can help you breathe a little better. And it's not as strong as your spicy peppers. It does have, some spice to it, but it can be a little more gentle if you're not used to really using stronger spices in your food, and in this case, our tea. So ginger can be a great place to start. Next, I want to talk about cinnamon. Now, cinnamon, real cinnamon, Ceylon cinnamon, has a lot of healing properties. Also, in many ways, once you've got your ginger, your turmeric, and some cinnamon, you're really covered. And the nice thing about cinnamon, especially if you're not going to be using any honey, is that it adds a nice flavor and almost a little bit of sweetness. And you can use the ground cinnamon, or if you want, you can use cinnamon sticks, and you can just break them up. Again, these are all going to be simmering with your turmeric and your black pepper. Now, speaking of cinnamon, I just want to clarify the difference between cassia and Ceylon cinnamon. They're very similar in flavor. They look similar, but if you notice, the actual Ceylon cinnamon is lighter in color, and the cassia almost has a little reddish brownish tinge to it. And this is going to break very easily, and this is going to be a little harder to break. But as I said, taste-wise, they're very similar. Nutritionally, they're a little different. And cassia does have benefits, as does cinnamon, and often a lot of what you'll see sold at the grocery store will actually be ground from cassia. But what I want to mention about cassia, if you were going to be using this as your cinnamon every day, you may want to think about getting the Ceylon cinnamon instead, only because there have been some studies, and I'll put links to this, as I said in the blog post, so you can read more about it, but there have been some medical studies that have found that cassia can be a little hard on the liver and or maybe the kidneys. So if it's something that you're going to use every single day, and if you already had liver or kidney problems, you may want to be a little careful with the cassia. So that's something definitely that you'll want to investigate. Alrighty, well now we'll get ready to make our tea. And as I said, we're going to just do the very basic version today so that you can see how this is made, and then you can customize it any way you want. And these are just ways that I customize it and suggestions that I'm giving. You can do all sorts of things. Really, it's a matter of herbs and spices that you like or that you're familiar with. And if you're very new to using herbs and spices, I highly recommend this book. It's called Rosemary Gladstar's Medicinal Herbs, A Beginner's Guide. I love this book. And if any of you know Heidi over at Rain Country Homestead, she actually introduced me to Rosemary Gladstar's books, and I am so glad she did, because that book, it's a beginner's guide, but whether you're a beginner or you're very familiar with herbs and their medicinal properties, you'll love this book. She has recipes and so much information, and she walks you through all the different herbs and all of their medicinal properties, and then she shares a recipe or two on how to make something using those herbs. So I highly recommend that. But in any event, alrighty, so here we go. We're going to put our 3 cups of water into our saucepan. In a small saucepan, it works great. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a teaspoon of our ground turmeric. And as I said, we're going to use the ground turmeric, but you can definitely use the fresh turmeric as well. And it works well to just help kind of release all of its properties by grating it. But if you don't have the ability to grate the turmeric, you can just slice it very thin as well. Alrighty, let me just get my teaspoon here. I'm going to go ahead and dump that right down into our saucepan. Now, I want to mention a word about working with turmeric. Whether it's the ground turmeric or fresh turmeric, turmeric stains. And it stains like the dickens, I'm telling you. So be careful when you're working with it. If you notice, I've got a lot of dark colors on. And when you slice up the fresh turmeric, it may stain your hands a bit. It'll wash off and it'll wear off, in a day. But if that type of thing bothers you, you'll definitely want to wear gloves. Alrighty, now I'm just going to count out 16 peppercorns. You don't really need to be that exact. I got 4 in there, but now another 2, 6. But basically, that's basically the amount that you're looking for. I'm going to take this over to my stove. I'm going to bring it up to a boil. Then we're going to turn it down to low, and I'm going to cover it because I want to prevent evaporation, and we're going to let it simmer for 10 minutes. Well, while the tea's simmering over on the stove, I want to get my cup ready with the lemon and the honey. I've got an organic lemon here, but if you don't worry. You can still use the peel. Just give it a good washing. Now, you don't have to do this, but what I'm going to do is just take off a little bit of the zest here, and then I'm going to just twizzle this right into my glass here. And you'll notice you'll like doing this because when you squeeze the pith, it releases the essential oils from the lemon peel, and it smells wonderful. I mean, it smells on my fingers and everything. And basically what I've done here in taking the peel off, I have only a tiny little bit of the pith there. You want to get as little pith as possible. Although the pith is nutritious, in this tea it can make it a little bitter. But I'll go ahead and put that right in there like that. Next, I'm going to cut this lemon in half, and then what I'm going to do is squeeze this, just using a little mesh strainer here to catch all the pits. I'm going to squeeze in half of the juice, or I'm going to use half of a lemon to squeeze this juice in that I'll have for my tea. Now, if you find the juice from half a lemon to be a little too much, of course you can go with less. Next, I'm going to add in a teaspoon of honey. And this is honey my husband's cousin gives to us. I'm going to just put in a teaspoon right into my glass. Let's see if I can do this neatly. But yeah, he raises bees. And he gives us some of the honey, which is wonderful. And a pourable honey works very well here, but if you have one of those sort of thick creamed honeys, you can certainly use that because the warmth of the turmeric tea will help dissolve it. But what I like to do is simply mix the lemon juice and the tea, and mix the lemon juice and the honey together. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you can't take any kind of sweetener, you can definitely leave the honey out. But if you want to give it some sweetness, you can certainly use one of the low-cal, no-cal sweeteners like stevia. Now, I brought this over to my stove. I brought it up to a boil. Once it came up to a boil, I immediately turned it down to low, the lowest setting that you have on your stove. I put the lid on and let it simmer for 10 minutes. Now, I've removed the lid. I've just let it cool just a few minutes because I don't want to put the piping hot tea into my glass with the lemon juice and the honey because I don't want to damage either of them. So you just want to let it cool down a little bit. Now I'm just going to go ahead and ladle some of this into the glass and we'll take a taste. Now I want to mention, if you've never had turmeric, if you've never had a turmeric tea or maybe a turmeric golden milk, it's got somewhat of an earthy, I would say, flavor to it. It's not strong like coriander or cumin. It's just a little earthy, but pleasant. But I think that in order to offset some of that earthy flavor is why when you see the golden milk or the golden milk teas or in this case just the straight turmeric tea, people often will add a little bit of lemon juice or lime juice, or one of the citrus juices, and maybe a little bit of sweetener, just to sort of offset that more earthy flavor. Now, if you want to get fancy, you can always use one of the cinnamon sticks as a little twizzle stick to stir this all around and make sure that lemon juice and honey is well distributed. And it'll also impart a little bit of flavor. Alrighty, well, let's give this a taste. Oh, that's so delicious. And perfect for every day, but also especially comforting if you have a cold or a flu. I hope you've enjoyed this wonderful marathon of how to make a variety of home remedies. And if you'd like even more home remedies, be sure to click on this video over here where I have a curated playlist with a whole host of wonderful home remedies that I think you'll find very easy to make and perfect for stocking in your traditional foods kitchen. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.